Okay. All right. So we're going to get started. We always like to start on time, end on time. Those are our rules of engagement when it comes to webinars. So today, the 5 gotchas of AI governance. I love this series we're running about the gotchas because everybody's jumping all over the AI bandwagon and everybody's scrambling to figure out how AI applies to their business. But I think it's really important that we figure out what some of the gotchas are before we jump in with both feet. Would you not agree?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Sure. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marie Wiese. I'm president of Marketing Copilot, a company I've been running since 2006. I'm a Microsoft MVP in AI, and I've spent about 30 years in the tech sector studying this crazy thing we call tech. And I can't imagine a more interesting time to be really looking at the next evolution than here we are right now in this big AI configuration. I don't know what else to call it. I'm going to come up with a name with it soon, but at some point I'll have a good name for it. Tucker, go ahead and introduce yourself.
So Tucker Oldham, I am work in our consulting group at ABS. I have had over 30 years of experience in the IT sector, which really just means that I'm old.
Hey, you're a seasoned tester. That's what I tell everybody. You're a seasoned tester.
Absolutely. But I've spent most of that time working with folks, helping them adapt technology to their business needs. And a lot of that has evolved into helping folks from a security perspective and compliance perspective. And with the evolution into AI, so much of that now is focused in those AI policies and just being smart about the way you're deploying AI in your business.
And you see a lot of things, your role as a virtual CIO, you see a lot of stuff going on across a lot of companies. I do the same thing in oftentimes my role as a virtual CMO. And it's kind of fun to see across these organizations who's doing what, how they're doing it, and to be able to bring best practices to the community. We like to do the giveaways right off the top. And the reason for that is, we want to make sure if you have to jump off early, you don't miss the goodies. This is the compliance readiness and governance solutions use case that ABS has put together. So please snap that QR code with your cell phone. We're going to show it again at the end of the session, but if you want to get looking at it right now, please snap the QR code. And this is Marketing Copilot's Guide to Responsible AI. This is the topic we've been going all over the country discussing with partners and ISVs and end customers and just basically people in the community who are interested in knowing what is the impact of AI and how to deploy it responsibly. So that's the reason ABS and Marketing Copilot have partnered together today to bring you this content. Let's get right to it. Tucker, if you think AI is not being used in your environment, you're mistaken. Kick us off with this first gotcha.
Yeah, I was speaking at a conference last week, Marie, and it was an interesting exercise we went through at the beginning. I usually do this when I'm doing in-person talks with folks where I ask, how many folks are using AI today? And this particular conference, it had maybe 100 people in it, something along those lines. And 80% of those folks raised their hands. The 15% that didn't were the C-level folks within that organization. And they looked around just in shock that this is already being used today. I think so many times folks think about AI in terms of Arnold and the Terminator and Skynet about to be self-aware, things like those along those lines. And I reminded everybody in that conference that Skynet went live, became self-aware in 1993. So we've gone past that bridge, and I don't think it's some evil thing. It's more about, like any technology, something that needs to be deployed responsibly, but really focus on helping you in your business world become more efficient and things along those lines. And we're already doing that today. We're already doing things like note-taking apps. We are a Microsoft evangelist, much like you. And so we utilize Teams and some of the functions in Teams where when we're on a Teams call, it's taking notes for us. It's telling us what our tasks are, following up, things along those lines. There's lots of those types of applications now out on the marketplace. And I wouldn't survive without Grammarly. At least I wouldn't look nearly as intelligent as I appear. And there's those little things that we already have seen where our iPhones are auto correcting us or making suggestions for us. And I think in a lot of cases, folks don't think about that as AI. They just think about that as a new feature. And the reality is that evolution that we're talking about, where those types of things are coming into the applications.
Absolutely. So I
Yep.
think, the thing we want to keep our audience aware of right off the bat is AI is, you might not even know you're already using it. You might
Yeah,
not even know what you're doing. And I remember, because I've been around tech for a long time. Do you remember back in probably the early 2000s where you weren't allowed to bring your own device to work? You had to
sure.
use the devices that were locked down by the organization. This is the laptop you use. This is the phone you use. You don't put it on the network unless it's been sanctioned. And those days are gone. Everybody's using everything everywhere. And as an average user, we don't necessarily know what is connected to what. And, I heard a great quote recently from a tech journalist, Kara Swisher. She said, "I don't need to know how the watch is built to be able to tell time. And I tell time really well, but I don't need to know what all the pieces are." So I think we can't do that in the era of AI. I think we have to be really aware of where things connect. So take a minute and explain this slide to our audience today, because I think this is crucial. The segmentation between public use and public data and your business data. Let's break that down for people, is how and this is definitely where you want to start, by looking at your organization and figuring out where are things public, where are things private.
Yeah, so I think so much of that, this isn't a revolution. This is again an evolution. And so the evolutional component of this is we do have those things we're extremely familiar with, where AI as a feature has already become a part of our lives, with things like the autofill, autocorrect, things that are already on our phone. And we are slowly but surely starting to dip in, not starting, we are well down the road of those free platforms like Copilot, ChatGPT. Google has Gemini out now, where those are free applications that can be used and are taking the data that's out there in the public domain and utilizing that in a much more efficient way than our browser searches and things along those lines.
Right.
But us, as that evolution continues, we're starting to see AI appear in our business applications, where we can start to overlay AI applications on that business data so that we can glean much more information efficiently out of that data we already house in-house. And then we talked about the collaboration suites and things along those lines, where we're starting to have tools deployed in them. The important thing to me about this is that organizations need to understand that both that public use and those free platforms are being used in their environment, and that private data, we're going to start to mine that data within AI too. So you almost have to have policies, procedures, a well thought through deployment of AI in all of these to make sure that I'm keeping my data safe and I'm really achieving what I want to achieve with that AI.
Right. So first, gotcha. AI is already in your organization, whether you like it or not. Take the time to think about where you have public use and where you have private use and where you want to be with your data.
And
And I think,
before we go further with that slide, the other thing I want to point out is folks can get confused because you notice that Copilot is really across not only
right.
3, but really 4 of these because it also plays in teams. And so you really need to know where your tools are and what data they're pointed to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And we've got some, we've got some areas for consideration with respect to adoption. We've got customer service, HR. We're seeing things happening in supply management for ourselves in marketing. And we've been deploying a lot of marketing automation and CRM for customers. That's what we do for end customers within the Microsoft stack. We see, people using ChatGPT to write blog posts and create content. And what we're even telling people is, yeah, you can speed up content deployment, tenfold. Doesn't necessarily mean it's good content. It doesn't mean it's on the mark. And so what we tell people, especially as you're thinking about these key areas of adoption, and I think you're out preaching this to your customers as well, is make sure your business processes are locked down and you really know where you're applying it and where it might create incredible efficiency or innovation and opportunity. But don't just start layering it in places where we've heard some of the stories of people using it in HR and suddenly everybody has access to everybody's salary information in the organization. You don't want that happening.
No,
so I think there's the areas of consideration, but one of the reasons I'm so excited about doing these sessions with ABS is they're so good at what they do. And this is where you really want to lean on a partner to have some really collaborative conversations about where it does and doesn't work. Would you agree with that, Tucker?
I would, and I love your slide because it helps folks really kind of dissect where they want to start in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Don't think about deploying AI. Think about improving customer service. Think about improving your marketing campaigns. Thinking about doing more with less. And when you put it into that context, it's going to help you so much with the deployment component of it, for sure.
Absolutely. I love that. Okay, gotcha. Number 2. Do you have control over what AI platforms your employees are using? So dig into this one for us.
So very much like what we were talking about in terms of we want to make sure that we don't have those platforms pointed at things we don't want them pointed at, I guess is the way of putting it. We want our internal data safe. We want to use the external data for getting a broader perspective, but maybe not necessarily changing our views and what we want to expound to our customers, things along those lines. So we want to make sure we are controlling what our employees are what tools they're using and things along those lines when we're deploying AI.
Absolutely. So, to ensure you're in control of it, you need to have visibility. And you need to know what platforms are linking into where and linking into what data, especially sensitive data. You don't want anything to undermine your business operations. So what's your best suggestion here for organizations when you talk about visibility? How do you help them enhance that visibility?
I think there's a couple of things. I spend most of my days now, Marie, talking with folks about compliance, policy, things along those lines. And when we're having those discussions, now I don't know about you all up north, but down here we haven't wanted to really be compliant since 1776, but we want to govern, and I think that's the big shift. You want to make sure you are governing your environment. You're proactive about this. I want to keep my things safe in my environment and things along those lines. And so I have to have visibility of what my customers are doing. So compliance shouldn't be those things, those policies I throw on in the desk and don't ever use. I need to be starting to think about not just policies, but procedures and formalizing these things so that AI doesn't get out of control in the environment. And I
Yeah.
need to be constantly assessing the risks that these things pose. Now, you should be doing that with any technology in your environment, but AI is going to make this so much more important to be governing my environment much more than I
Right.
have in the past.
So even for a small business like Marketing Copilot, we've produced an AI policy for our organization, and we're very transparent with our customers about where we use AI in the marketing process. We have an AI tool on our website that we've developed. But I've just typed in the chat, and I want to let all the listeners know that you are welcome to ask questions at any time. Just type them in the chat. We're monitoring them. My colleague at Marketing Copilot, Elle, is in the background, and they're going to be watching questions as they come in. But I've just typed in the responsibleAIinstitute.com, and I think I've got that right. It's either responsibleai.com, but Elle will fact check that for me. But the Responsible AI Institute has a lot of really great templates and tools, and we pulled down a policy template from them because we've joined as a member, and we've pulled down a policy template and we've written our own policy for our organization. And so if anybody on the call today needs assistance with that, or they have questions that they want to follow up on, how do you build these policies? Oh, thanks. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Elle. Responsible.ai. I wasn't even close. Thanks, Elle. But I was just going to say, I know you have been helping companies through this on the compliance and governance side. And this is a really important thing for people to be considering. So here's a good example. Take us through this example, Tucker.
Yeah, so I work with several law firms on their governance and compliance posture, and was speaking with one of those firms. This has been a couple of weeks ago now, and they had just come back from a conference talking about AI. And one of the major things that came out of that conference was this idea that they are going to be shifting. We're talking about a major disruption within that vertical when it comes to AI. The conference mentioned the idea that within 5 years, AI is going to be able to write a brief than any human lawyer ever could, and that the shift in law work will be where folks are going to be much more tuned to being in those meetings, being in those depositions, being in the courtroom versus the paperwork on the backside, because so much of that can be done by AI. How do we deal with that shift? How do we deal with ensuring that our clients' data is still secure and confidential and all those sorts of things? And at the same time, this firm had a attorney who would invite an AI bot to every meeting. That AI bot was taking all the notes of that meeting and then emailing that to the attorney after the meeting was over. Great, awesome use of AI. But maybe not the right platform for it, because that is a public AI tool that they were using. And now all of a sudden that confidential information is sitting out in the public cloud. So
yeah, exactly.
Organizations are dealing with this major shift where there is obviously great use cases for the use of it. But again, I have to govern it. I have to make sure that I'm thinking about all the risk associated before we just run out and deploy it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, this is where organizations like Microsoft are spending a considerable amount of time, money, and resources showing people how to create that infrastructure internally. Because, you know, as long as you have permission to record a meeting and you can do so in Teams, that stays within your data set. So this is, again, back to that public versus private. And, you know, there's some amazing tools out there, but first, they might not be compliant. And second, to your point, you don't want confidential information just floating out there in the atmosphere. You never know what's going to happen with it. Gotcha number 3. And this is the one that I love. And this is, I remember in the dawn of, you know, back in 2010, 2011, when social media was really starting to pick up. And I remember people saying, you know, I said, you should build a LinkedIn strategy and have LinkedIn policies within your organization. And you should roll out, to your whole organization, where the keys to the car are kept. So if somebody builds your company account and they leave and they've got the username and password, you know how to go get it and all these things. I remember back then, and they're like, I'm on Facebook. I don't need training in social media. And I think there's a little bit of that happening again. Everything old becomes new again. I think it's happening. Why do I need training in AI? So give us this one. Breakdown number 3. Gotcha. Number 3.
Yeah, when I'm working with customers on an AI policy for their organization, I'm really thinking about it in terms of what is the outcome we want from our end users. And so that training starts to come in the form of, one, they need to have the training before you allow them to use the tools, for sure. You need to have a list, in my mind, a list of tools that you approve, and then the end users need the training beforehand. And that training comes in terms of what data should an end user be thinking about putting into AI and what shouldn't they? So that confidential information, do I really want that in AI? And which one of the AI tools we've deployed am I going to allow that in?
Yeah. And I was at a user summit recently, a couple of weeks ago, and excuse me.
Bless you.
Excuse me. A little bit of hay fever already. At this conference, one of these fairly large organization, nonprofit, who it has a lot of technology built on the Microsoft stack, and the people in the sales and marketing support area were saying, we want to deploy AI, but we're not quite sure how to do it yet. And I said, well, has anybody given you training on what the options are? And they said, no. And I said, well, go back and ask for that first.
Yeah.
Go back and ask for training on what some of the products are that are being used in the organization, how they work, how they function. Wrap your head around that first. And if the answer when you go ask for training is, oh, we don't have a training program, tell your company you need one right away, because you need to be able to do these kinds of things. I think they're super, super important. And there's lots of ways to do it, right? We've got platforms, we've got training, but take us through some of your best or what you think are some of the most successful platforms here.
Yeah, I think, again, it depends on the AI that you're deploying, for sure. But we have lots of customers beyond AI who utilize automated tools for training. Things like Know Before, where we send out a quarterly requirement for cybersecurity training. And those types of platforms now have AI training built into them. So I can create a regular cadence and be able to track my employees, making sure that they've done it. And then we also talked about how AI is going to start to is already, but is going to be more so embedded into our individual platforms, right? So if my CRM platform starts to have AI in it, those CRM platforms are also going to provide training so that your end users are using that intelligence correctly. And now there are specific trainings where Microsoft has a ton of information on training, but we can also go to YouTube and find free versions out there. If you're a smaller organization, it's important to do training. I don't care where you get it, but you got to do it. And so if you need some of those free versions, they're out there for sure.
Yeah. So now we're trained. And what data does AI have access to within your organization? I think that's even, there was a time when you could be in marketing or sales or some area of an organization, and you didn't have to know a lot about how the rest of the organization functioned. You knew your role, you knew your lane, you knew what was going on within it, you knew the tools that you were being given to do your job. And I think we just have to get a lot smarter as employees to be asking, well, where does this connect to? How does this work? And I have to say, being a non-technical person, I'm not a person who went to computers, I didn't graduate in computer science. I don't know how to, again, I'm the person who knows how to tell time. I don't know how to build the watch, but I'm really good at telling time. And, but I now find myself asking questions I would never even asked even 5 years ago. Well, where does that connect to? How's that getting stored? Where's the information residing? And as I run my own business, I keep asking more and more questions that I never thought I'd have to ask. But I think, no matter where you are in the organization, like, ask these questions. These are such important questions to be asking. And I think it's good. So let's get to gotcha number 4. This is the one everybody loves.
Yeah.
I need to have clean data before I consider AI. My data has to be cleaned up. What?
Well, your example earlier is perfect in the sense of if I don't have very good access control, AI all of a sudden can get into anything like financials or HR data or whatever the case may be. So kind of going back to that, when I'm in person talking in front of an audience, I'll ask the question of how many folks have gone through a file cleanup project, right? And those files that we have in our file folders are the perfect example of kind of what we're talking about. Every organization periodically goes through this process of creating a new filing structure and looking at access at all those different files. And for some reason, it's still a disaster a year later or whatever the case may be. And
I heard somebody recently say, I equate data cleaning and data cleansing and data management to going to the dentist and getting my teeth cleaned.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
and me personally, I can't stand getting my teeth cleaned. I hate it, but I still go because I know how important dental health is. And the whole thing is, if you just go every 6 months to get your teeth cleaned, then a year from now, you don't have to have a root canal.
Yeah,
Nobody
absolutely.
wants that. So this is a great time for people who are considering AI to look closely at that. Wouldn't you say
Well,
this is a great
not
time?
only that, but I also think there's going to be a mind shift where those file structure cleanup projects were meant to help folks find things easier, not necessarily thinking about access control and who has access to what. I am sure in my organization, just like you have access to things that you probably didn't even know you had access to.
Yes.
And it's not a particularly major deal. The problem is AI is looking at everything. So
Right.
now I think the end user level is really going to start to be thinking about access levels as we move forward much more than we have in the past.
Right.
And the good news is there's technology to help us through this process. Not only is AI going to be deployed to help us in our jobs, it's also going to help us in doing some of the cleanup work that we're going to have to do moving forward. So,
Yeah.
from an organizational perspective, make sure you're controlling that access level. Make sure you're thinking about who has access to what in your data. And when I'm working with folks on a data classification policy, I think it's real easy to start with 4 levels of classification. And I think so many times when I'm working with folks, I just don't know where to start. And this is a great place to start. Think about your data in the context of these 4 areas. Restricted data, things that are internal data, but very sensitive. HR data, ownership data, financial data, things along those lines. Confidential data is usually your client data, the things that are your secret sauce that you don't want to get out in the outside world, but more folks within the organization have access to it. But I still want to keep it very, very confidential. And then that internal daily use data, and then finally public use stuff that I don't necessarily mind who has access to it or sees it. If I can think about these 4 buckets and start to organize myself in those areas, it's going to be a lot easier to deploy AI as you move forward and be able to point AI at what you want to point it to.
Right. Absolutely. Okay. Let's get to gotcha number 5. I need to have policies around AI. What? Isn't this just something we're using to do some better search?
Yeah, and because of all the things we've talked about and how does have the ability to run amok and get into things we don't want, even the smallest organization needs to be thinking about enforcing and policies and having a governance plan. And this is a tough one. I've had lots of folks that are smaller organizations say, you're talking about enterprise stuff where we have policy, real formalized policies in place and things along those lines that I have to make folks acknowledge and that sort of thing. Even the smallest organization has an employee handbook, right? Start to employ or deploy some of these policies into your employee handbook if that's the way you want to do it. I think as informal as it gets, you need to make sure you're having these conversations and having better awareness, for sure.
And I think a rule of thumb, no matter what business you're in, no matter who you sell to, no matter what you're selling, whether it's a product, whether it's a service, if you have a website, you should have a policy up about AI. Because you have a website where you're accepting information or people are coming to get information from you, you should be very honest about where you're using AI in your organization.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really important. Here's a few examples that we've pulled together for people. What do you want to add here? I know these are best practices that you've been helping organizations with, and I think that first one, acceptable use, is so important. But they're all very important. And what would you tell people around this? I mean, I almost think if people are on the call today, take a snapshot of this one and build out an Excel spreadsheet against it, because in the dreaded Excel spreadsheet might be the way to start.
By and large, at a minimum, these are the policies that I am implementing with my customers, not only with AI, but frankly, with any technology. And it becomes even more important in the AI world. So, making sure that folks can understand what acceptable use of the technology is, how important confidentiality is of your data. We've already talked about some of the things that need to be in your AI policies in terms of training and appropriate tools that you want. That data retention and classification goes along the lines of what we just talked about. Those 4 categories are usually what I started with. The one in the middle is by far the most important. Have a plan around continuous enforcement. I hate working with folks who say, just give me a piece of paper so I can pass a compliance. I want these things to be stuff that you are continuously enforcing so that your business is safer and that you have a real good idea of the risks in your environment. If you're doing this just to have a policy that goes into a drawer, don't do it. It's not worth it.
Exactly.
If you're continually doing it and continually enforcing it, you're going to have an environment that can take advantage of AI and not have places where AI gets you into trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I said, start with your website. It's a public place that lets people know and employees know. I can just go there and find out what our policy is on a lot of this. And I think it's great because you're being transparent.
Yeah.
I want to jump in, and what's really interesting, I built this whole presentation on the 4 pillars of responsible AI back in January after a trip out to the Microsoft mothership, as I call it. And I went to the mothership and I got to hear some of the best practices being presented. And I was really impressed with how people are digging into this. So I built this 4 pillars of responsible AI. But what's been really cool doing these presentations with ABS and jumping into this topic is that when I layered it on, it layers onto the gotchas and it layers onto the best practices that you as a company are already deploying. So, intellectual property, where does your content come from and who created it? How are you using it? If it's intellectual property within your organization, how are you protecting it? Data security, of course, is your organization ready? That whole idea behind what's public, what's private, where is it being stored? The one that we find very problematic is data and algorithm bias. And that's where we want to figure out if we're running something on data and we're pulling data to figure out a model or how we want something to work, is the data we're using representative of all of the pieces of information that we need it to be representative of? And again, that's going back to look at your data, especially if you're using private data. If you're using public data and you're using these large language models, or you're in a data lake somewhere, I think these are important questions to be asking, because a lot of the AI experts have explained to me, even though I didn't need it explained, I understood that you can't, they're just parsing these large lakes of data to see if they can run something to get against it to get a result that they're looking for. You don't know where that data is from originally. You don't know if it's been validated. You don't know if it's representative of everybody you want in there. And in particular, we've followed a lot of researchers and scientists who've been trying to see if they can find something that is unbiased and, you know, create things that are unbiased. And apparently that's becoming impossible to do. And the reason that it's impossible to do is because we all start in different places as human beings, where we come from, what we have access to. We all start in different places. So it's impossible to create this flat model. So these are some of the things that you're going to want to understand. So for example, I remember before AI was on us in a really powerful way, 5-6 years ago, I was speaking on a panel and with women in the financial services industry and talking about the whole idea of products that banks are building, doing data analytics and data mining. And at the panel, we had a really honest conversation about being careful of these things, because if your customers aren't completely representative of the customers you want to have, or they don't represent people in the right way, and you go build a product that excludes people, as an example, these are things that people are starting to have to really think carefully about and dig into. And then lastly, brand ethics. Are you doing things with AI that you would hate as a consumer or as a buyer or as a human being in general? Because if you are, don't apply that in your organization. Don't use things in your organization that are scammy techniques that would definitely hurt your brand if people knew you were doing that. So that's why I'm saying the whole idea of responsible AI and being transparent about your policy, I think, is so important. We then found that, okay, people are going to find this amusing. So we actually went and asked ChatGPT, what are the 5 common mistakes to deploy? And when we looked at these, we were really delighted because it mapped back. So I just, for everybody on the call today, I want to be completely transparent that Tucker just brought his brain to the party. He brought his brain and all his years of experience, and he said, okay, this is what I think the 5 gotchas are. And then we kind of went to see, well, what are the general public talking about? So I think in a certain way, we've talked about every single one of these is, you know, not having the right mindset in your organization. And that if it's just relentless automation without thinking through, how does it help employees? How does it help your customers? How does it help you with innovation and growing your business? Then you're just applying it. We've already talked about the fact if you don't have good manual processes in place and you then start to apply AI, you're just going to magnify the problem 20-fold. Having dedicated resources, getting training, making sure the policies are in place. The other thing that we've seen work really well, and I'm sure you have with your customers, Tucker, is the idea of engaging the community. And I know you at ABS have done an amazing job of going out and canvassing customers and having one-on-one, real face-to-face conversations about how this is going to work and what it's all about, and letting people ask questions. I think that's fantastic. That's what every single technology provider should be doing before they sell one single license of anything. Go have these conversations. And then your point about if all you're going to do is write a policy and shove it in a drawer somewhere, don't even bother doing it. And, you know, don't get those wrong expectations set. So we just wanted to see, this was a bit of a test to see how Tucker stacked up against ChatGPT, and he completely nailed it, completely nailed it. So I just want to say human beings are not at risk of losing their jobs, because we need people like Tucker and the folks at ABS to be helping us with all of these things. Don't forget to download the Responsible AI Guide from Marketing Copilot. We're opening the phone lines right now for questions. If anybody has any questions that they want to ask us. And don't forget, here's the compliance, readiness, and governance solution use case from ABS. And they've got a couple other really nice goodies on their website with respect to AI, if you want to go back and rewatch or reread any of those. Do we have any questions? Anybody out there on the call today who wants to ask a question? Can you please show? I absolutely can. That's an easy answer though, Jessica. I can do that. Give us a tough one. Who's got a tough question for us? Could we, if anybody has a question, please jump in. What are some of the most common questions you're getting these days, Tucker, when you go out and talk to customers? What's the number one question you're getting asked?
I think it's, probably most is, how is this going to affect my vertical? What are the things you're seeing trend-wise within our particular organization? I think that conversation about that each organization's unique, that you mentioned, that you really need to have the conversation about what you're trying to accomplish, not what we're seeing out in the marketplace, is the critical component to that. I think each vertical is going to be upended by the AI that's coming down the pike. It's what you want to accomplish is the critical question in my mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I just put up our email address for people, and we do have one interesting question here from Beth. How does AI gain access to company files?
The answer is if you give it access. And I want to make sure that we kind of go back to that original that slide where we were talking about public and private. Is probably the best answer to that. So when we think in those terms, how does AI get access to your data in the public realm? Chances are it's your employees copying and pasting sensitive information into those free tools. And so I want to train them on not doing those types of things. Okay. When we are talking about the other side of the fence, your business data, you are deploying a tool like Copilot, and you're giving it access to those internal systems and internal data. And so now I got to make sure that that data is that I have the right permissions turned on, and I'm not letting AI into places that I don't want it to. So it's really two sides of the fence here. And I think one of the things I would say about that policy, the policy that you're deploying, is no matter what that policy needs to say, that a human being is reviewing whatever AI is outputting, so that we make sure we're thinking about what is allowed to the outside world and what's not. We've got to have that.
Absolutely. Okay. We've got a couple of links in the chat if you want to grab those links. If anybody's still struggling with the codes, here's our email addresses again. Tucker, it has been a pleasure talking to you. And I know we'll circle back in September. Things are moving so fast in the area of AI. There's always a ton to talk about. And we'll definitely come back and dig a little bit deeper into the governance side of things, but we do have the right link up right now in the chat about the compliance, readiness, and governance one pager if you want to download that from the link. Thank you everyone for being on the call today. It's been a pleasure to share this with you, and you'll be receiving the recording, I think, tomorrow, and you'll have access to replay it, share it with people in your organization. As always, we're here for you. Please reach out, and thanks so much for joining us today. And we'll let you get back to your summer fun. But this is an important topic, and I'm glad you came and shared your hour with us today for everybody on the line. So please take care, and Somebody said, how do we both know you're real? Oh, I'm real. And it doesn't get any realer than this. But thanks,
I
everyone.
promise you, AI can make me look better if you
Yeah,
didn't
well,
think I
yeah,
was real.
me too. Like
Yeah.
there'd be a totally different head on this body right now. So anyway, thanks, everyone.